counsel's office believes that this is within the president's power to do it, and therefore he's doing it.
Okay, so they agree with lawmakers who say that they don't have the power to freeze this funding.
Again, I would.
Karoline Leavitt entered the prime debate studio, knowing the heat was on. What she didn't expect was to leave with the upper hand, as host Paul Danning found himself tangled in his own questions. How did the showdown unfold? With no edits or filters, Leavitt showed she was more than ready to stand her ground. As the cameras rolled and the tension in the studio reached a fever pitch, Danning came out swinging. With his practiced blend of authority and concern, he wasted no time in launching into his first question. "Let's talk about the responsibility of the media, Karoline," he began, his voice steady. "Conservative outlets thrive on manufactured outrage, election fraud, conspiracy theories. Isn't it fair to say that networks like yours are built on fear, not truth?" The question was a trap, one designed to force Leavitt into the defensive. But she wasn't rattled. She didn't even flinch. "That's an interesting argument, Paul," she said, her voice smooth but controlled. "But if we're talking about fear-mongering, let's not pretend it's a one-sided issue."
And any Republican who chooses to vote against the president's exceptionally qualified cabinet nominees, and not a single Democrat swayed from voting against President Biden's nominees.
The subtle challenge hung in the air. Danning's face flickered, and the first crack in his composure appeared. He hadn't expected her to fire back so quickly, or so skillfully. Leavitt didn't just back down. Instead, she took the reins of the conversation with surgical precision. "Misinformation is a problem," she said, leaning into the debate. "But let's ask the real question. Who gets to decide what qualifies as misinformation?" The room seemed to lean in. Danning shifted in his chair, preparing to counter, but Leavitt was already ahead of him. She rattled off a series of examples, each one damning for the mainstream media: the Steele dossier, the Covington Catholic students case, and the Hunter Biden laptop story, all exposed as missteps or intentional obfuscations. "How many times have we seen mainstream outlets manipulate the story?" she continued, her voice never wavering. "How often does correction come only after the damage has been done?" Danning's usual charm and wit faltered in the face of Leavitt's unflinching poise. He was losing ground, but Danning wasn't going down without a fight. He straightened in his chair, clearly preparing for the next round. "That's all well and good, Karoline, but those are isolated incidents," he said, dismissing her examples with a wave of his hand. Leavitt wasn't having it. "Want me to keep going?" she fired back, her calm demeanor now taking on an edge. For the first time in the debate, the energy shifted. The carefully controlled atmosphere that had once defined the segment began to unravel. Paul was no longer in control. Karoline Leavitt was. Danning was getting desperate. He leaned in, his voice now laced with an unmistakable edge. "This is exactly the problem," he said, his eyes narrowing. "People like you always play the victim. You claim conservatives are under siege, but your side controls the conversation. You want to be challenged, but only when it's convenient for you." Leavitt remained unshaken, her response as sharp as ever. "I see. So when mainstream outlets label stories as misinformation and quietly correct themselves years later, that's accountability? But when conservatives challenge the narrative, it's dangerous." The tension was palpable. Danning's words were starting to come out forced, lacking the usual confidence he exuded on air. His attack on Leavitt seemed to be losing its power. Just when it seemed Danning had regained his composure, Leavitt made a move that would change the game entirely. With a controlled motion, she reached for a stack of papers beside her. "Paul," she began, her tone now deadly calm. "Let me read something to you." What followed was nothing short of a scandal. Karoline held up a document with the bolded headline of a direct quote from Paul Danning himself. An email from his personal account, sent just hours before the show aired, had been leaked to the public. Danning's confident expression shifted to one of discomfort. The quote on the page was a damning contradiction to everything he had been preaching on live TV. The email describes mainstream media's responsibility to control the messaging before the public forms the wrong conclusions, Leavitt said, her voice never faltering. Would you like to explain what you meant by that, Paul? Paul's face tightened. I don't comment on internal communications, he replied, trying to dismiss the damning evidence in front of him. But Leavitt wasn't done. She casually picked up another page and continued. It goes on to say, we can't afford to let right-wing hysteria dictate the conversation, even if that means omitting inconvenient details until public sentiment is properly aligned. The walls were closing in on Danning. He could feel it. He tried to wave it off. Emails can be taken out of context, he said, desperate to regain control. If you had any integrity, you would acknowledge that pulling a single quote and spinning it is what bad faith actors do. Leavitt wasn't backing down. Oh, I agree, she said smoothly. Context matters, which is why I also have the rest of the thread. She flipped through the papers like a seasoned lawyer cross-examining a suspect. She had him trapped. The studio was on edge. The producers, once a silent presence, were now watching closely. The control room, normally bustling with quiet efficiency, had gone still. Everyone in the room could feel it. Paul Danning's career was hanging by a thread. Leavitt didn't let up. You say the media controls the conversation, she continued, her voice cool. But when conservatives challenge the narrative, it's censorship. That's quite the double standard, Paul. Danning's typical smooth-talking persona was slipping fast. He was losing his composure, and he knew it. Danning let out a dry laugh, but there was no amusement behind it. Oh, please, he scoffed. This whole thing is just a carefully staged performance. Manufactured outrage, selective leaks, cheap theatrics. People like you don't debate. You don't challenge ideas. You hunt scalps. But the more he spoke, the more he revealed his frustration, and the more the room noticed it. Danning was unraveling. Karoline Leavitt didn't just defeat Paul Danning in this debate. She exposed him. She took his own words, his own emails, and laid them bare for the world to see. The debate wasn't just a defeat for him. It was a total collapse. As Danning sputtered out his final remarks, the room was already buzzing. His control over the conversation had slipped, and the fallout had already begun. Social media was alight with reactions, with viewers across the country commenting on the host's embarrassing display. Even the network executives in the control room knew it. Danning's time was up. The internet had a field day after the broadcast. Social media was flooded with reactions, memes, and hot takes from fans and critics alike. Many fans took to Twitter and other platforms to share their thoughts. One user tweeted, "Paul Danning got outclassed by Karoline Leavitt. She didn't just win the debate, she owned him." Another user posted, "Never seen a host get humiliated like that on live TV." Danning was shook. Even major news outlets were picking up the story, adding fuel to the fire. The once mighty host was now the subject of a media firestorm. And Karoline Leavitt? She was being hailed as a force to be reckoned with. Within hours, the network's decision was final. Paul Danning was fired. The studio, once his domain, was no longer his to control. The shocking turn of events sent shockwaves through the media world. It wasn't just a debate, it was a career-ending moment. Fans and critics alike weighed in on social media. "What a way to go out," one Twitter user posted. "Paul Danning had it coming. That was brutal." So, What's next for Karoline Leavitt? She's on the rise, and this debate is only going to boost her profile. Conservative viewers are rallying behind her, while the media world watches to see if she can maintain her momentum. As for Paul Danning, he'll have to answer for his actions. The leak of his emails and his disgraceful display on live TV have left a stain on his career that may be impossible to wipe clean. But the real question is, how will this controversy play out in the coming weeks? Will Danning manage to stage a comeback, or is this the end of his reign as one of the top TV hosts in America? What do you think of the showdown between Karoline Leavitt and Paul Danning? Was she right to expose him like that, or did she cross a line? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know who you think came out on top. And don't forget to subscribe for the latest celebrity gossip and insider info on the most talked about.